We need a proper public safety and security plan. What does that look like? And within that plan, within the framework of that plan, we address how we deal with crime, violent crime and all other crimes.
But do we have that?
You're asking the wrong person.
What have you been doing since you retired?
Fully immersed in the voluntary sector. I'm a charter member of the Rotary Club of Manor Park, and I continue to do domestic violence intervention and awareness, education and training. I run workshops. Violence, and particularly domestic violence, cannot be handled by any single institution. When you look at what a victim of domestic violence would need to get out of a situation, it requires more than law enforcement, because they face challenges around things like housing, child support, they have problems where employment is concerned, and may have injuries, may have health challenges, and it's just a multiplicity of issues that they are faced. You know, back in the day, they used to talk about wicked problems. You remember that concept of a social issue being a wicked problem? Violence is one of the wicked problems that we face in Jamaica. And the reality of it, it takes way more than we are currently doing, in my humble opinion, to effectively address it. There is a preponderance of effort and I think probably on law enforcement approaches, and that might look as if it can work, but when you look, if you were to compare violence to an iceberg, the deaths and the maiming and so on that we see is merely what is on the surface. Because one of the things we need to recognize is that not all acts of violence are criminalized. And the law, you couldn't criminalize every single aspect of violence. Because think about somebody who does psychological manipulation. Sometimes people are being abused and they don't realize how much psychological abuse and emotional abuse they are absorbing.
Yes.
When you look again, according to researchers, that there's an increased likelihood of the intimate partner experiences among women whose partners, their partners is likely to be involved in male to male violence. So the street violence that you see on the street, some of those perpetrators are very likely abusing their intimate partners, and by extension children too.
And are influencing others to pick it up.
Right. So based on my experience as a cop, we've come across situations where people who are in gangs are perpetrators of intimate partner violence. They
beat up their woman.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
Abuse them very badly.
Yes.
Terribly. We had one of our most notorious. When I was at Police Area 5 headquarters, St. Catherine was under that command. And there was a fellow called Navarro Hodges. He's one of the most notorious criminals from out there.
Yes,
yeah.
That gang, they're in court.
No, yeah, right. But yeah, he was part of it in the early days.
Right.
His girlfriend was pregnant, and our intelligence was suggesting that he was determined that there's no way that anybody was gonna catch him, lock him up, because he wanted to see his baby born.
Oh.
Now then, a year or so later,
that very twisted mind.
But a year or so later, that girl was found dead in a taxi with a taxi driver. And every indication that we picked up suggests that he did it. So the same fella who wanted to have a youth and to live to see
the baby boy,
and knowing how precarious his life was because of his life choices, he then turned around and deprived that baby of the mother.
Right.
And then eventually he himself was murdered by his cronies.
Do you think that the Cocoa Peace massacre was domestic violence?
The one in Clarendon there?
Yes.
Well, they're family, right?
Yes.
So domestic violence is about intimate partners and blood relations. People are so because there is, from what I picked up, they are related. There was blood relation there and living together. So obviously, and again, I have no way of verifying this. I'm no longer in the system, but I have to keep your nose in. I picked up that the family situation overall may not have been as healthy as it could. This young man could have also been suffering from some kind of psychopathy himself, but obviously that is family side.
Yes. Okay. That's the other side of it. The blood side and not the marital side.
Right?
Okay.
But in terms of our narrative in the country, we focus a lot on the marital side, the people who are in intimate relationship, and I don't think we give enough attention to how those same people may very well abuse elders who might be in their care, and the child abuse that comes from it. When you look at the youth violence itself, youth violence is not just coming because they are bad and they are this generation that is gone and whatever. They are products of experience, exposure, and environment, right? And they go to school, and before I left the force, I had a youth empowerment and mentorship program where I trained a number of police officers to be facilitators. So what we did, we had this year-long mentorship program, and we pulled the kids together for a 2-week residential camp, not a boot camp, but where we exposed them to ideas of who are you, what's my identity, who are your role models, what are you learning. So we call it iPad for life, because in that it was about your identity, your purpose, your attitudes, and your destiny. Where are you going? So within that 2 week, we were shocked at the speed with which these youngsters cottoned on to these concepts and these ideas. A number of police officers are in the force are still using the concept and still engaging with school-based youngsters. The reality of it is the speed with which they told us things that happened to them in terms of violence, their adverse childhood experiences, and they told us about some of the changes that they were going to make in their lives. Nobody pressured them or coerced them, but by having the conversations with them and putting different options to them and listening to them and so on, they actually made their choice. The first one we put on, it was shocking to me how youngsters just came and said, we have a gang and we're going to break it up.
Which is the worst police division that you've ever worked in?
Actually,
which one gave you the most problem?
No, I spent my formative years as a cop, as a detective in St. Elizabeth. St. Elizabeth was never one of those parishes that had a high incident. The 80s, that's way back in the 80s, right? 80s BC, before cellular. It's so far back. So there was a lot of interpersonal violence, never actually led to murder. Sexual offenses were a problem there. And then I went to Manchester, I'm a little bit more challenging. And then I went to St. Thomas as a soup in charge. And basically those were my 3 geographic divisions until I went to Area 5, where I had the responsibility for those police divisions. St. Catherine by far obviously, was bad, both north and south. And they had St. Andrew, St. Thomas. So they had their challenges, but you can imagine what Spanish Town with the gangs and the problems. What I did for the team that I led, we created a tool, a methodology that I call violence risk assessment. And that tool allowed us to look at various kinds of elements in the community, victims, perpetrators, this community, the space. We did spatial assessment. We look at the kind of what I would call relationships that would be on the side of the perpetrator and the relationships on the side of the victim, and that helped us when we put a lot of variables on the table, and when we looked at it, that helped us to do some degree of predictive analytics to kind of understand how the reprisal violence would follow, and so that we could very proactively address it. So we want to recognize that the criminal violence are part of some simple things that lead to a process that could culminate in that. On the street you diss me. Yeah. So the dissing come in various parts and ways for different persons. So we had to take that approach to be able to kind of get behind some of the violence, and it worked for us. We saw results, because one of the things we also had to look at was the relative participation or otherwise of the wider community. Mm-hmm. Meaning to say that what is the level of tolerance in a community for certain forms of abuse and violence? Because different communities have different tolerance level. There is a general tolerance for a certain degree of violence right across the spectrum, in my humble opinion. But then you can't, while there is some amount of generics that you can look at, each community have its own peculiarities. I remember there was a case that came to my notice. I won't call any parish or wherever because I have to protect people. But there was this very, very remote, in my humble opinion, community, and there was just this consistent pattern of violence, murders and shootings and whatnot. And we couldn't figure out, none of the normal response was getting us anywhere until I said, I need a kind of a social report on the community. So I created a template and asked the officers to go and do the queries and come back. And the report came back with a number of things. It started years before, out of schoolgirl situation where a boy inappropriately touched a girl. And the mother of the girl reported the incident to the police. The boy's mother was offended that the police should not have been called for something like that. And that simple incident led to years of feuding that culminated in the death of the young man with whom it started, his mother, and some other relatives, and a whole host of people got dragged into it. Gangs emerged in the community because of that incident. People left the community to go into the capital to be tutored by other gangsters. To
come back to take revenge.
And how they should run the place. Guns for drug, swap. Even people from overseas were starting to get involved to sell money. That risk assessment thing that we did told us how to approach the community, and we got the whole situation to the point where the violence ceased. Suppressive actions may produce short-term results, but they don't necessarily give you that long-term peace that you want, or public safety and security that you want. So you have to ensure that your law enforcement activities, that you continue to strengthen those, that your investigative capacity is strong and on point, and therefore that when you bring cases before the courts of prosecution, that they are strong, and really, if you strengthen that and ensure that that is on point, then one, you'll protect respect for the rule of law, and you'll build confidence in the criminal justice system. Of course, we know that there are issues on that side in terms of sheer volume.
Yes.
If sheer volume is a problem for law enforcement, then obviously sheer volume has to be a problem for the courts itself.
Right.
Because when we used to analyze and look at and do audits and look at performance and so on, we found that detectives were having too many cases to investigate. So that in itself shows you there's another gap that needs to be addressed, so that one, that investigative part of the force is strong, but you also need the frontline officers who do regular operational work, their ability to investigate simple offenses. That is important too. When I was in charge of Area 5, the commanding officer at the time called me. We started to see a lot of reports about people being attacked, motorists and others, along the Spanish Town bypass, right? And when we an assessment of the space showed that the bushes come all the way almost onto the highway, the road itself. Yeah. And so we launched an initiative to cut back that bush way back in, and therefore there was the space now was open.
Right.
So if they hid in the bushes, they had a wide open space.
Yes.
Before they actually got to the road.
Right.
There was no place to hide. That stopped. That kind of attack stopped.
Yes.
We need a proper public safety and security plan. What does that look like? And within that plan, within the framework of that plan, we address how we deal with crime, violent crime and all other crimes.
But do we have that?
You're asking the wrong person.